When the Slate Truck was first announced, I thought that it was awesome. Seriously, a small, bare bones pickup without all the unnecessary stuff that has made modern vehicles so expensive. That's exactly what I've been asking for. I liked it enough that I seriously thought about putting down a deposit, but I didn't. And then the more I learned about the Slate, the less that I wanted one. And what's interesting is that the problem with Slate isn't that it's too basic. I like basic. I don't need a giant screen. I don't need leather seats. I don't need 47 different computers controlling everything. Give me some knobs, a decent air conditioner, a radio, and a truck that does truck things, and I'm happy. But the problem with Slate is that I think that there's a point where it goes from being simple to being feeling incomplete. And with a starting price of $25,000 before you start adding stuff that you actually want, I'm starting to think that Slate might have crossed a line. I want to give Slate credit because I still think that the original idea is pretty brilliant. Take an electric vehicle, make it small, make it simple, get rid of a bunch of unnecessary equipment, and let people customize it themselves. And then sell it for a price that normal people can afford. That's a great idea. But I think Slate has a problem. I don't think the price matches the product. And this is going to be the most controversial part of the video, but I think the Slate should cost about $15,000. If Slate could cost about $15,000, I think it would absolutely blow the doors off the car market. And at $15,000, I'd forgive almost everything about it. Manual windows? Fine. Basic interior? Fine. No giant infotainment screen? That's okay. Plastic everywhere? That's okay. Short driving range? We can get around that. But because I'm buying a brand new $15,000 vehicle, my expectations will be completely different. But once you start talking roughly around $25,000, now I'm looking around. What else can I buy for $25,000? And once I start adding accessories and configuring the Slate the way I want it, now we're potentially talking about $30,000. And that's where you start to lose me. Because $30,000 isn't a cheap car anymore. That's real money. 2, 3. And I know this is going to sound harsh, but the more I look at the Slate, the more I get this weird feeling that I'm looking at a really cool toy. Almost like a Fisher-Price version of a truck. And I don't mean that just as an insult. There's something about the combination of the size, the extremely basic interior, materials, the range, and the whole accessory-based design that gives me that feeling. And maybe some people are going to love that. There's absolutely a market for a tiny electric vehicle that's extremely simple and easy to customize. But personally, if I'm spending $25,000 to $30,000, I want to buy a real vehicle, and I'm not convinced Slate gets me there. Then we have the range, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about lately. At around 150 to 200 miles as advertised, the range might sound okay depending upon which battery you're looking at. But advertised EV range and the range you actually experience aren't always the same thing. Highway driving affects it, cold weather affects it, heat and air conditioning affects it, and payload affects it. And you're obviously not going to intentionally drive around at 0% battery. So even if the truck says you can go 200 miles under the right conditions, your practical usage range is considerably less. For a commuter, probably fine. If you've got a charger at home, drive 30 to 40 miles a day, you're absolutely going to love it. You come home, plug it in, wake up the next morning, and the truck's charged. That's actually one of Slate's biggest advantages. But we're talking about a pickup truck. What happens when you want to take something somewhere? What happens when you put something heavy in the bed? What happens if I'm doing 75 miles an hour on the interstate with the air conditioning running? What happens if I want to use a truck like a truck? That's where I start questioning whether this would work for me. And I think discovering REO actually made me look at Slate differently. Because these are two companies that are trying to solve a very similar problem in completely different ways. Slate's answer is basically strip the vehicle down to its absolute bare essentials and make it electric. REO's answer seems to be Take a traditional truck, strip away the unnecessary complexity, and personally, I like the second approach more. I still get a gasoline engine. I can pull into a gas station and be back on the road in 5 minutes. I get a traditional pickup bed. I get something that's designed around repairability, and I get physical controls. I get something that's supposed to be easy to modify. And I'm assuming REO can actually deliver on what they're promising, and I'm getting all of that for potentially less money than a Slate. And that's hard for me to ignore. Now, obviously, there's a gigantic disclaimer here. REO still has to build the truck. Slate is much further along. Slate actually has vehicles, and they have serious financial backing. And there's still a lot of questions REO has to answer. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that REO has actually beaten Slate. It hasn't. REO has to prove that it can deliver. But purely comparing the two ideas, REO's idea appeals to me a lot more. And that's really where I land on this. I don't hate the Slate. Actually, it's quite the opposite. I really want to like it. Because I think the auto industry desperately needs companies try to do things like this. I want cheap cars again. I want simple cars again. I want small trucks again. But I don't want vehicles that require an $800 a month car payment. Slate looked like that was going to give us exactly that. But the more I actually look at the product and the price, I keep coming back to the same conclusion. It's too expensive. If this were a $15,000 truck, I'd be sitting here making a completely different video. At $15,000, the weirdness becomes part of the charm. It's cheap, it's basic, it's different. Who cares? At $25,000, I'm going to start noticing everything that isn't there. And approaching $30,000, after I configure the way I actually want it, now I'm comparing this to real trucks and real cars. And I think that's where Slate could have a real problem. So, would I buy a Slate right now? Probably not. And that's kind of crazy for me to say because when Slate first revealed, I thought I wanted one. Maybe Slate proves me wrong. Maybe these things hit the road and the owners go absolutely crazy. And I hope that happens. The more competition on affordable vehicles, the better for everybody. But I think Slate's biggest challenge isn't convincing people that bare bones trucks is cool. They already did that. Their challenge is convincing people that bare bones truck is worth $25,000 or more. And for me, that's where the idea starts to fail for me. And I'm curious what you guys think. Am I being too harsh on Slate? Would you buy one for $25,000? Or do you think this thing becomes way more interesting at $15,000? And at roughly $25,000 to spend, would you rather have a Slate? Or would you take your chances on something like REO? Let me know what you think down in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.